Dear reader, welcome to Whole Notes. If you're new here, I'm glad you found your way in, and I want to acknowledge that some of you are arriving at a significant moment in your careers. You're stepping into executive roles, senior administration, and positions of real organizational influence. The timing of your arrival matters because what we're exploring this week is not peripheral to that work, it is central. Whole Notes exists because the gap between who leaders appear to be and who they actually are is not just a personal problem. It is an organizational one, a cultural one. And as the Epstein files have resurfaced into public conversation in ways that are difficult to sit with, sometimes a catastrophic one too. The leaders you're becoming will be asked to set the tone, model the standard, and create the conditions in which other people either thrive or quietly disappear. That is not a small responsibility. And it begins not with strategy or policy, but with the most fundamental question in my work. Are you the same person on the inside that you show up as on the outside? That question and the courage it takes to answer it honestly is what Whole Notes is about. So I'm glad you're here for this one. Content note, this issue touches on sexual abuse and its long-term impact on adult women. Please read or listen, hear, watch at a pace that feels right for you. And if this isn't the week for it, it'll be here whenever you're ready. I want to name something before we go further. I am one of approximately 1 in 3 women in North America who experienced sexual abuse before the age of 18. According to the World Health Organization, that number is 1 in 5 globally, which means that wherever you're reading this, there is almost certainly someone in your organization, on your team, or in your boardroom carrying this same history. I was a teenager when an older man, charming, well-regarded, apparently kind, made me the object of his attention in ways that were not safe and not okay. I didn't have language for it then. Most of us don't. But what I know now, after years of my own healing and nearly 2 decades of working with high-achieving women, is that these experiences don't stay in the past. They follow us into boardrooms and performance reviews, into the way we shrink when powerful people disappoint us, into the exhausting work of keeping our composure when something in the room reminds our nervous system of what it once survived. Research consistently shows that women who experience abuse in adolescence carry measurable impacts on professional confidence, boundary setting, and their relationship to authority well into adulthood. I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I'm sharing it because I've earned the right to speak plainly about what happens when the people in positions of power are not who they appear to be, and what it costs the rest of us when we don't have tools to name the gap. The Epstein files are not a story about one monstrous man. They are a story about a system of people, powerful, credentialed, respected people who chose the appearance of integrity over its practice. People who shook the right hands, sat on the right boards, and gave money to the right causes while protecting something unspeakable behind closed doors. We call this many things. We call it corruption, complicity, or abuse of power. I call it incongruence. And I want to be careful here because what I am not saying is that the word incongruence is adequate for what happened to those young women and girls. It is not. What I am saying is that incongruence, the gap between the inside and the outside, between who you show up as and who you actually are, is the mechanism. It is how harm travels undetected through institutions. It is how the wrong people accumulate influence. And it is how good people, not yet powerful people, people who sense that something is off but can't quite name it, end up questioning their own perception instead of seeing the reality in front of them. This is not a distant problem. A version of this dynamic lives in most organizations. Smaller scale, yes. Less dramatic, often. But the same architecture, a polished surface protecting something that cannot withstand scrutiny. And what does this have to do with you? If you're stepping into leadership, and many of you reading this are, or you're already in leadership, you're inheriting institutions that have practiced incongruence for generations. The question is not whether you'll encounter it, you will. The question is whether you will be able to recognize it, name it, and refuse to participate in it. That requires something most leadership development programs don't teach, a deep, practiced understanding of your own congruence. Because here is what I have learned in 17 years of this work. You cannot spot incongruence in others if you haven't done the work of examining your own. You cannot hold others to a standard of alignment that you haven't yet demanded of yourself. And you cannot create the kind of organizational culture where people tell the truth if you are still a version of yourself that isn't fully true. This is not about perfection. No one is perfectly congruent. What we are talking about is the commitment, the active, ongoing practice of closing the gap between who you are and how you show up. I built my 3Cs framework of character, congruence, and choice as a tool for individual leaders. But in the wake of what the Epstein files have brought front and center, I want to name it as something larger, a protection framework. For you, yes, and for the people who will come to work for you. Character is the foundation. It asks, who are you when no one is watching? What are your actual values? Not the ones on the website, not the ones you perform in the room with the right people, but the ones that govern your behavior in private. The Epstein situation is, at its core, a character failure at scale. People who performed generosity and civic virtue while privately enabling and participating in abuse. Character is not just what you say, it is who you are and what you do. Congruence is the practice of closing the gap. It asks, does the outside match the inside? Not just in your wardrobe and your communication style, though those are real indicators, but in your decisions, your relationships, your use of power. Incongruence is uncomfortable to sit with. It produces a low-grade internal friction that many high-achieving people learn to override with busyness, achievement, of the validation of being seen as impressive. The problem is that what you override doesn't disappear, it compounds. And choice is where this becomes active. It asks, now that you know the gap exists, what will you do about it? This is where leadership either earns or loses trust. You can understand your character and recognize your incongruence and still choose not to close the gap because closing it is costly. It means standing for your values in public. It means declining relationships and opportunities that require you to look away. It means being the person who names what others have agreed not to name. That last one takes a particular kind of courage. The Epstein story is full of people who knew or suspected and chose not to name it. Their choice, shaped by self-interest, fear, social pressure, or simple moral cowardice, made them complicit. This is the hard truth that is most relevant for those of you stepping into institutional power. Your silence, your looking away, your choosing to preserve your position over your integrity, these are choices, and they carry consequences for others first, and eventually for you. I want to be honest about something because I think a lot of leadership content softens this edge. Choosing congruence is not free. It costs you the comfort of performing a version of yourself that is easier to maintain than the truth. It costs you some relationships that were built on the performance rather than the person. It sometimes costs you positions, opportunities, and approval from people whose approval you have spent a long time earning. And it costs you the particular relief of not having to remember what you said because what you said is what you meant. And that last one is highly underrated. People who do this work, who genuinely close the gap between their inner truth and their outer expression, describe a specific quality of tiredness that goes away. Not physical tiredness, the tiredness of management, of tracking the performance, of maintaining the distance between who they are and who they are presenting themselves to be. When that goes away, what comes in is not just confidence. It is an authority that other people can feel without being able to name it. Presence that doesn't require performance to sustain itself. The ability to walk into a room and simply be the most honest person in it, which in most institutional environments is a form of power that cannot be easily undermined. And just a little note to those of you that are arriving here new, you are stepping into a world that is actively renegotiating what leadership looks like. The old model, hierarchical, authoritative, and compartmentalized, is losing its grip, not because people have suddenly become idealistic, but because the cost of incongruence at scale has become impossible to ignore. We have watched too many institutions collapse under the weight of their own gap. What is being asked of leaders now is something different, something harder, and I would argue something more sustainable. The practice of being genuinely yourself, consistently in all the rooms you enter, not performing authenticity, that collapses the moment the audience disappears, but actually doing the work of knowing who you are, aligning how you show up with what is true, and making conscious choices that close the gap rather than widen it. This is the work, not a retreat, not a workshop, not a rebranding, a practice. And it begins with a question you probably already know the answer to if you're willing to sit with it honestly. Where is the gap for you? This week, I'm sitting with this. The people I work with who have done the most significant inner work are not the ones who have become perfectly polished. They are the ones who have become harder to manipulate because there is no gap between their public self and their private self for someone else to exploit. Congruence is not just a leadership virtue. For many of us, it was a form of protection we didn't know we needed until we had it. If this issue landed for you, I'd love to hear about it. Comment, subscribe, like, and share. I read every comment. And if someone in your life is stepping into a leadership role and needs this conversation, please share the video. We need more leaders who are asking the right questions before they have the power, not after. And finally, the work of building congruence doesn't happen in isolation. If you're ready to close the gap between who you are and how you show up in your leadership, your presence, and yes, in how you dress, I'd love to talk.